Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today is a very personal story about a miraculous healing. For those of you who watched the interview on medical intuition with Dr. Norman Shealy that was released a few weeks earlier, you'll know that I referred to this story. My guest is Nancy Tertre, who's been a guest on New Thinking Aloud 7 times previously. She's an attorney. She's also a practicing remote viewer and a professional psychic. We've talked about psychic work in criminology, for example, among many other topics. She is the author of Psychic Intuition, Everything You Wanted to Ask But Were Afraid to Know. She is also the author of How to Talk to an Alien, which is a book about a fascinating discipline she has pioneered called exolinguistics. And in fact, today's discussion about a miraculous healing event that occurred to her touches ever so gently on that exact topic of exolinguistics. This is an internet interview because we are now in the coronavirus lockdown period. And so now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Nancy. It's a pleasure to see you once again.
Thank you, Jeff. It's really a pleasure to see you again, too.
So you've been through an incredible adventure, and I think a good place to start is that you went to Russia.
Yeah, that was definitely an interesting adventure. I went there last August for 2.5 weeks, and I went there to go study psychokinesis at an institute there. And I went there with a colleague and a friend of mine who's an aerospace engineer. I was supposed to go with the physicist friend of mine who had to unfortunately back out at the last minute. And we had, it was a wild ride, a really wild ride.
Now, I have heard about some of the psychokinetic training programs in Russia. The one I heard about is where they have you concentrate on like a little windmill or something suspended on a pin enclosed in a glass case to see if you can make it spin. Is that what you were doing?
Yeah, I had already been doing that for several years. So I knew how to do that already. What I was interested in was seeing their particular techniques for doing that. That's you can do it on a, I have some here. I'm not going to move the camera at this point. You can put a sort of a pinwheel on top of usually a needle or something, and if it's light enough, it's going to spin. But you encase it inside some type of usually a glass container, and you want to make sure you're not touching it because the temperature variations can cause movement, and also vibrations and things like that. Another way you can do it is you can put it inside a glass container and you can suspend it by a silk thread and you create sort of a spiral. And again, you don't touch and you simply focus your intention on it and you get the thing to move. Do a bunch of other things. You can do things on water. You can do things with magnets. You can do things with compasses. And you can do lots of other things. And I've already done lots of other things. So I really was looking for the advanced course. I think I was given the beginner course.
So you came back somewhat unsatisfied. You were expecting more than you got?
No, here was the problem. I went there thinking that I was going to go to something equivalent to all the types of training I've ever done, which has been, if you're dealing in more quasi-spiritual realms, you're dealing usually with a spiritual type of an environment. And it's gentle, it's expansive, it helps you grow, it's meditative, it's beautiful. And we got put into really what was the equivalent of, it felt like a military boot camp. And it was full of huge amount of mind control and isolation, containment. We were surveilled at all times, 24/7. Our stuff was searched. We weren't allowed to keep it with us. We were told that if and when we would be allowed to eat and what we would be allowed to eat. We were told that we had to be accompanied in order to go to the bathroom. We had to ask permission. And that was at all times. So we were very tightly monitored. And it was, at a certain point, we went out into the countryside into a gated, isolated community. So it was just a spooky experience all the way around.
It wasn't what you expected.
Not at all. And on top of that, and that's sort of what started some of the issues that I've had this year, starting on day one. Well, what they would have us do was usually about 6 to 7 hours a day of physical exercise. That was also sort of a shock to me. Some of it was sort of sort of like yoga. Some of it was much more physical. But starting from the first day, because I kept a detailed journal, I began to experience back pain. And I've never had back pain in my life. Certainly never, ever lower back pain. In fact, when I get massages, I tell the massage therapist, don't worry about my back. I don't care about my back. And they're always surprised because they say that's the first thing everybody wants. I never cared. And the pain was progressive. And by about the third or fourth day, I was in excruciating pain. I admitted to the director of the program that I had taken ibuprofen. I really had put off doing that because I didn't want to influence my psychological or my psychokinetic abilities. But I couldn't tolerate the pain anymore. It was horrible. So it got worse and worse. And at one point, the director of this program, I could barely sit. That's how horrible it was. I couldn't stand. I forced my way through all the exercises. I did not complain because I was with Russians, and everybody knows how, you just got to buck up when you're with Russians. That's just the way it is, because that's the way they are. And so it took me a long time to just say, look, I think I need to slow this down a little bit, or I need to rest. And at that point, finally, about 7 or 8 days later, the director said, okay, you stand up. So I stood up. She was a medical doctor who apparently had represented cosmonauts. And she looked at me. She was also a medical intuitive. She claimed to be quite magical. And their leader, who was sort of her boss, is, according to them, sort of the leader of everybody on planet Earth in terms of magic. And from what I understood, he is a former nuclear submarine commander also. So she said, stand up. I stood up. She scanned me sort of with a medical intuitive look. And she said, okay, you sit down. So I sat down. She said, okay, now. And of course, it's painful for me to sit because I sit bolt upright on the edge of my seat. She said, okay, now you bring white light through bottom of spine. You bring it through top. You send it out through top of head. So I do that exercise. I take my white light, shoot it out through the top of my head. And she said, okay, now you take black energy from above head and you bring it down through top of head and you bring it down all the way through your spine, every vertebrae to the bottom. And I did that. As soon as I did that, I said, I think I've done something really wrong here. I have never, ever in my life heard of any healer, medical intuitive, psychic medium, alternative healthcare practitioner, anybody recommend pulling in dark energy, ever. And okay, I figured I'm in Russia. I'm going to do what the Russians suggest. I'm going to do it their way because I'm here to learn their method. And if this helps, and she's a doctor and a medical intuitive, so be it. I'm just going to try it. I think that was a huge mistake, what I did. As I began to learn more and more and more what they were up to, the more I realized I was on my own. So I came back to the United States, and I had had terrible pain while in Russia, got back and had such excruciating, horrific back pain. I couldn't walk. I could barely drive. Long story short, I had a broken bone in my lower back, and the disc was completely herniated and gone, and I had really bad nerve pain. So that gets you up to about September.
My God, I mean, at that point, one would think you need surgery.
Yeah. So I was immediately referred from my primary to an orthopedic surgeon. And then, of course, because I don't believe in getting surgery immediately, I got 2 more, what do you call them? Second opinions. And for neurosurgeons and orthopedic surgeons, the top in New York. And they all immediately looked at my scans and my x-rays, and they said, oh, my God, I see why you're in such terrible pain. It's obvious. And you do need surgery. That is the only thing that will solve this. This will only get worse. And the neurosurgeon said, you'd better do it fast rather than later.
And now you're talking about a broken bone. Did you experience any trauma?
No. No. And this particular type of a broken bone, apparently, and it's what connects the vertebrae. It's a little tiny bone in the back of the spine, and it does get broken apparently. But normally it's broken by teenagers who are engaged in extreme sports like football, gymnastics, or hockey or whatever it is they're doing. Not an old person like me sitting around doing meditational stuff.
Very strange that occurred at all. But I guess the really miraculous part of your story is yet to come.
Yeah. So February 9th, let me explain a little bit further because you might find this interesting too. So I pursue all types of conventional and unconventional healing modalities. Among the conventional, I did a half a year's worth of physical therapy. It helped a little bit, but then I got worse around December. I had people praying for me, from remote viewers to, religious folks to, you name it. I had so many, the Mormons praying for me, everybody. It was fabulous. And I'm sure that must have helped. However, it didn't solve my problem. I also went to see a Pakistani faith healer who put boiling hot oil on my back. And I never understood how she did that until I watched her one day. And I saw she worked on another client. She would always boil the oil in a frying pan, and then I'd hear something, she'd dip something in it and it would pop, all those boiling popping sounds, and then she'd smear it on my back, which always frightened me. So what I saw was she was dipping the heel of her foot into the frying pan, and then on one leg was almost using it like a paintbrush on my body, on my back. And she was never burned once, and I was never burned once. In fact, I didn't even have red marks on me. So that was sort of, that was a very different Islamic faith healing thing that I did. I did get some relief, but then over a few months it got worse. I then have a dream. And I have dreams. I think I probably have mentioned this to you. I'm a lucid dreamer. And then there are things beyond lucid dreams that have real consequences that are verifiable in real life. And this was one of those very rare dreams.
And when did this dream occur?
This was February 19th,
2020.
Right.
Yeah, this year, 2020.
Correct. I dreamt I was downstairs in my kitchen, and I was with some unspecified friend. And I look out, I'm washing dishes, and I look out the window and I see there's a red helicopter landing on my front yard. And I say to my friend, don't they know they can't land a helicopter in my front yard? And they did. The helicopter lands, and a man gets out. He's fairly tall. He's not terribly good looking. He's got sort of ordinary brown hair. And he comes to my front door. So I open my front door and I say, yes, can I help you? And he says, here, this is for you. And he hands me a package. And it's about, let's see, yeah, roughly like that. It's about, say, 5 inches by about 4 inches by about 1 inch thick or so. Extremely heavy, like a slab of metal. And in my dream mind, I describe it as being heavy like lead. That's how heavy it was. It was odd. And I said, well, what's this? And he says, you're going to need this. And I couldn't imagine I don't need anything. I'm very blessed. I don't need stuff. I don't need anything. I'm a very happy human being. And the only thing I could think of was that, there was somewhat in retrospect as well. I would like to be able to move, because at the time my back was so bad, it would hurt for me to fill up a cup of coffee and to carry it, because the weight, I forgot to mention my spine, because of the missing disc and the bone, it's not connected. So it's 50% disconnected. There's a slippage and an incredible instability, so that anything that pulls me forward will naturally make my entire spine slip. So, I couldn't bend over. I could barely put on my socks. I had trouble washing a dish in the sink, or lifting something out of the laundry or the dishwasher, whatever. And the only thing I could think of was, I'd like to live my life the way I used to. I'd like to be able to walk again, because I had to stop walking. I couldn't exercise, couldn't do anything. And so as soon as he said, you're going to need this, and I couldn't imagine that, and I looked at him and I said, oh, you're not from here, are you? And as soon as I said that, his body began to take on sort of a bluish glow, almost like a TV type of a glow, or like a hologram. He started to sort of glitch. And so then his body, which had seemed so, solid and physical, disappeared. And what remained was something absolutely indescribable. It was an entity. It was made of several bluish orbs of light. It had some things that were sort of straight, but not exactly. And I don't have words for it. And I'm really good with words.
Mm-hmm. But this is a dream.
It's a dream. Well, I'm going to say it's a dream.
More than a dream.
It was more than a dream. But I woke up with my heart. Oh, and that was it. That was the end of the dream. I woke up with my heart pounding. I don't normally wake up with my heart pounding. And besides, there was nothing scary about that dream. Why would my heart be pounding? I wake up. The next day I call a good friend of mine who is very psychic, and she's had encounters. And I said, maybe, what do you think that was in that package? Because I'm so disappointed. In my dream I didn't get a chance to open up because it was wrapped in brown paper. I didn't get a chance to see it. What do you think it was? All I know is it was heavy like lead. And she said, well, what about maybe it was bismuth? And I said, bismuth, because I know a fair amount about geology and rocks and crystals and things. And yeah, that sort of makes sense. And then I Googled it, and I saw that you could make it. I believe it's the next heaviest metal next to lead. It's very brittle. It's silverish. In fact, I'll even show you. Yeah, I've got a perfect container for it. I'll show it to you. I decided to order 5 pounds of bismuth based on nothing. I don't know why I ordered it, other than the fact it made total sense. And the fact is, I knew I needed exactly 5 pounds. That's what. It is beautiful. Now, this is the non-crystallized version. If you want to crystallize it, you apply heat, and it starts to create little crystals that look incredibly like spinal vertebrae. And I thought that was intriguing. So I order it about 5 days later. And so now we're, the third week in February. My bismuth shows up. I don't know what to do with it because I bought it on a total whim. I put it in my bedroom, and I look at it and whatever, but I don't do anything with it. And the next day I go downstairs to get my usual cup of coffee, and I have no pain. I've been in chronic 24/7 pain since August 2nd of 2019. Night and day. Doesn't matter whether I'm walking, sitting, standing, lying down, doesn't matter. And I said, well, that's really interesting. Maybe I'm having a good day for some reason. But I monitored it, and here we are. Today's April 14th, 2020. So I'm 2 months out, and every day I'm now walking 2 miles a day. I'm walking up and down huge hills. I'm carrying things. I'm unloading things. It's as if my spine simply snapped itself back in place. And if we weren't all in shelter-in-place, stay-at-home rules, I would immediately run down and get an X-ray because I think something happened.
Yeah. That's an incredible story.
Yeah.
It certainly is, and I'm so glad that you're feeling better. But I really wonder now, have you had any subsequent dreams, any other inkling as to this being that appeared to you in the dream?
No, I haven't. And I don't think that that's the kind of thing that you can sort of conjure up. I think that's something that it's the equivalent. I might sound ridiculous, but John Dee had the same. John Dee was on the second floor of his chapel and thought he saw an angel show up at the window who handed him a crystal egg. And whether it's an angel, whether it's an extraterrestrial, whatever it is, it's a gift that's being given for a certain type of enlightenment. And I took that. I had no idea on February 19th that I was going to need to have my back fully functional in order to buy. I had to buy roughly 50 bags of groceries and carry big bottles of bleach so that because being this old, I knew that I had to be, I really had to stay at home. I don't want to risk anything.
You're in New Jersey, aren't you?
I'm in the hot spot of the planet right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So you went into lockdown shortly thereafter.
Absolutely. It was, I'm trying to think of I was just trying to review some of the dates. I believe it was mid-March when we all went into lockdown. So a month later. So that gave me a month to really think about this and to be able to carry things. And yes, the man in my dream was 100%, he was 100% correct. I was going to need that. Because on February 19th, I just made a note on this. Let's see, President Trump was saying it's gonna work out fine. I think when we get some warmer weather, that's gonna have a great effect. There's no big deal. The CDC hadn't really come down with any particular prognostication or anything on the virus at that point. We didn't know. We didn't know that it was a Chinese virus. And that we only discovered, somewhere in the beginning of January.
So you really needed to get your health back.
I did. And it was, as far as I'm concerned, it was a godsend and it was a miracle. And I am eternally grateful to who or whatever that was, because as much as I do believe that you can heal yourself, I do believe that. And you can alter your immunity. You can do all kinds of things with taking care of your physical body. But when you're talking about, as the neurosurgeon told me, he said, there's nothing else to be done here. You have to have surgery. It's a strictly structural issue. And when it's structural, when it's bones, and it's very difficult to imagine how you heal those things or how you put an entire spine back into alignment. I don't know how you do that.
But you've apparently done it.
Yes. I don't understand why. I mean, it's phenomenal. But I think in most of these circumstances, at least my circumstances, when I have had particular encounters, that they have always been in some form or another a benefit. They've given me a form of enlightenment about something important, and they've advanced my direction in my life. I haven't had any negative experiences.
Well, it's really quite remarkable, Nancy, and I can't help but wonder if the fact that you're the person who wrote the book, How to Talk to an Alien, you're one of the pioneers in the field of exolinguistics, and it seems as if your encounter, as you yourself point out, is in some ways similar to the famous episode in the Renaissance of Dr. John Dee.
Yeah. Yeah,
about which you wrote in your book.
Oh yes, I did actually. Forgot about that. Yes, I did. I'm sort of speechless on it. I don't know. It's the kind of saying. I feel like those people who like they live through a tornado or something. They say, "Oh my goodness, this is the kind of thing that always happens to somebody else. It never happens to me," or you win the lottery or something. I don't know. You just don't imagine that you're going to be an actual recipient of something like that.
Well, and also my sense is that this is not the kind of thing that is amenable to any kind of a mechanistic, rational analysis. It's coming from another level completely.
Yes. And I think it's kind of interesting. If you figure... I spoke with another friend of mine who also happens to be a former nuclear submarine commander. And I happened to mention the conditions that were inflicted on me when I was there. And she was so horrified, she did not even really want to have... She didn't really want to have any further discussion, but she said, "I will tell you that The Russians are the best at black magic in the world by far. And it truly, when I told her some of the treatments, she seemed to feel that I had been subjected to that. I have spent the last, what is this, almost, 7, 8 months, undoing that in the way that I undo things. And given the fact that I have been able to bend metal before, and I think I showed you that once, I've bent not just the utensils, but steel rods, like
no, I don't recall that you showing me a big steel rod. I'd love to see that. But
you want to see?
In any case, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I got to get up. Then it'd take me.
Okay. Don't worry. I'll edit the video.
Okay. So.
This is all metal that you have.
Yeah.
Wow.
Hang on. Well, so you could do really. Cool.
That's very impressive.
You could do stuff like that. And these are not, if you could feel them, you could see they're pretty thick. And I have lots of these. So utensils I'm totally fine with, but this was really a very cool thing for me. This is a steel rod. And once it's bent, you can sort of rebend it. But if you tried to bend any section of this, it was determined by Marty Rosenblatt, who you probably know.
Of course.
Yeah. He said he had tossed these out at a PK party. He said, well, I decided to pick up some steel rods at, Home Depot or something, and I've determined they're completely impossible to bend with your hands. And he put these in with 2 of them with a bunch of utensils, and I picked this. And I figured, well, I know it's impossible. And he was really impressed with this. So, my point is, if you know that you can play with absolute things that we consider absolute realities and structural things, then you have to appreciate, understand, or at least acknowledge the possibility that these things can be structurally rearranged by very unorthodox methods. And I do think that that's what happened.
That's probably a very generic way to put it. But that's probably as good as we can get right now. You could call it magic or psychokinesis or a gift from an angel or an extraterrestrial. It'll never boil itself down to something, I think, that makes sense in terms of Western materialistic mechanistic science.
Well, they're going to have to get used to it because that's the next step in evolution, and that's what we do absolutely have to understand. And if we want to progress, and if we want to be able to understand the influences that are being put on us, we have to acknowledge the existence of these kinds of influences. It's not wishful thinking, this stuff. This is real stuff.
Well, Nancy, thank you so much for sharing your story with me and with our viewers. And I want to say before we close that the beautiful painting that is over your shoulder, you explained to me, was made by Ingo Swann, about whom we've done an earlier interview. In fact, I'm going to link to our earlier interview about Ingo Swann, since our viewers have been looking at that painting throughout this entire interview.
Yeah, and you wonder, you've heard about blue aliens and blue people.
And the one in your dream was kind of bluish at some point, after you identified him as not being one of us.
yeah, well, whatever it was that was left that I cannot describe was emanating all kinds of blue light. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it's a real pleasure to connect with you once again, Nancy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's good to reconnect with you.
Likewise. And I'm really very inspired by your story. It's a wonderful story to share with people.
It's a crazy story, but people need a little crazy every once in a while.